Before we begin, we'd like to ask you to tell us your name and the city you're watching from. We love getting to know our audience. Also, please don't forget to give this video a like, share it with others, and subscribe to our channel. That way, we can keep bringing you more stories like this one. The storm had no mercy. It never did. Ilara had learned that truth in the span of a single night, the kind of night that strips away everything you thought you knew about the world and leaves you naked before the indifference of nature. The merchant vessel she'd boarded in Charleston had been sturdy enough, or so the captain had promised. A routine voyage down the coast, he'd said. Safe passage to Savannah, where she planned to start over, to build something new from the ashes of her old life. Her husband had been dead for 8 months. Consumption had taken him slowly, cruelly, turning his strong frame into a hollow shell. She'd nursed him through the final weeks, watching him fade like ink in water, until one morning he simply didn't wake. The grief had been overwhelming at first, a tide that threatened to drown her. But grief, she discovered, could be endured. What she couldn't endure was the silence of their empty house, the pitying looks from neighbors, the suffocating certainty that her life had already been written and there were no more pages left to turn. So she'd sold everything. Packed a single trunk with her clothes, her mother's silver locket, and a leather-bound journal she'd never had the courage to write in. She'd walked away from Philadelphia without looking back, believing that distance might dilute the ache, that new air might fill lungs that had forgotten how to breathe properly. The storm had other plans. It came without warning just after midnight, a wall of black clouds that swallowed the stars. The wind arrived first, howling across the deck like something alive and furious. Then the rain, sheets of it, cold and brutal, turning the world into a chaos of water and wood and screaming men. Ilara had been thrown from her cabin when the ship lurched sideways, crashing into the bulkhead with enough force to steal her breath. She'd crawled toward the deck on hands and knees, salt water burning her eyes, her nightdress plastered to her skin. She remembered the moment the mast snapped, the sound of it, like the world's spine breaking, the way it fell in terrible slow motion, taking rigging and sail and 3 men with it into the churning black. She remembered clinging to a piece of railing as the deck tilted at an impossible angle, remembered the captain's voice, raw with terror, shouting orders that no one could hear over the roar of the sea. And then the wave. It rose from the darkness like a mountain towering above the ship, blotting out what little moonlight pierced the storm. For a moment, everything went silent. In that moment, Ilara understood she was going to die. There was no fear in the realization, only a strange, cold acceptance. Perhaps this was always how it would end, not in a quiet room surrounded by memories, but here, in the throat of the ocean, erased as if she'd never existed at all. The wave came down with the weight of God's fist. She didn't remember hitting the water. There was only the shock of cold, the suffocating pressure, the disorientation of not knowing which way was up. Her lungs screamed for air, but her body wouldn't obey, tumbling through the dark water like a leaf in a river. She kicked, clawed, fought against the current with everything she had, and it wasn't enough. The ocean was too strong, too vast, too utterly indifferent to her will to survive. Her vision began to dim. The cold seeped into her bones, turning her limbs heavy and useless. She thought of her husband then, wondered if he'd been waiting for her on some distant shore, wondered if death would hurt or if it would simply be a kind of sleep. Her mouth opened and water rushed in, filling her throat, her lungs, drowning her from the inside out. And then, hands, strong hands rough with calluses, grabbing her beneath the arms and hauling her upward through the water. She broke the surface gasping, choking, vomiting seawater onto the deck of a ship she didn't recognize. Rain hammered down around her. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the chaos in stark white flashes. Men shouting, ropes whipping in the wind, and standing over her, a figure in a long coat, water streaming from his shoulders like a dark baptism. "Breathe," he commanded, his voice cutting through the storm. Not gentle, but certain. "You're not dead yet." She coughed, heaved, dragged air into her burning lungs. Her vision swam, but she could make out his face in the lightning's glare. Weathered and hard, a scar cutting through his left eyebrow, dark hair plastered to his skull. His eyes were the color of the sea in winter, cold and deep and unreadable. "Hold on," he said, and then he was gone, barking orders to his crew in a language that was half English and half something older, rougher. She tried to stand, but her legs wouldn't support her. She collapsed against a coil of rope, shivering violently, watching as the storm slowly began to lose its fury around them. The ship rode the waves with a grace the merchant vessel had never possessed. She realized dimly that this was no ordinary ship. The black flag snapping from the mast told her that much. Pirates. She'd been saved by pirates. The irony would have made her laugh if she'd had the strength for it. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time had lost all meaning. Eventually the rain softened to a drizzle, then stopped entirely. The clouds began to break apart, revealing a sky full of stars so bright they seemed close enough to touch. The sea, exhausted from its rage, settled into a gentle roll. Elara's teeth chattered so hard she thought they might break. Her nightdress was ruined, torn and soaked, and offering no protection from the wind. She wrapped her arms around herself, but it did nothing to stop the shaking. She was going into shock, she realized. She'd survived the storm only to die from exposure on the deck of a pirate ship. The captain returned. He stood looking down at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable in the starlight. Then, without a word, he bent and scooped her into his arms as if she weighed nothing. She tried to protest, but her voice came out as barely a whisper. He carried her below deck, down a narrow passage lit by swinging lanterns, and into a cabin at the stern. It was larger than she expected. A proper captain's quarters with a heavy desk bolted to the floor, shelves lined with books and maps, and a bed built into the wall. He set her down on the bed, and she immediately curled into herself, seeking warmth that wouldn't come. He moved to a chest in the corner and pulled out a heavy wool blanket. "Get out of those clothes," he said, tossing the blanket onto the bed. "You'll catch your death." She stared at him, her mind struggling to process the words. He stood waiting, watching her with those winter sea eyes, and she realized he wasn't going to leave, wasn't going to give her privacy. There was no lechery in his gaze, no predatory hunger, only a cold pragmatism that somehow felt more unsettling. She started, but her voice cracked. She swallowed, tried again. "Will you stay?" His eyebrow lifted slightly. "You need help?" "No," she said, though her trembling hands suggested otherwise. She pulled at the soaked fabric of her nightdress, managed to get it over her head through sheer stubborn will. The cold air hit her bare skin and she gasped, quickly wrapping the blanket around herself. It smelled of salt and tobacco and something else. Wood smoke maybe, or spice from some distant port. The captain turned away, moving to a cabinet where he poured something dark into a tin cup. He brought it to her. "Drink." It was rum, strong enough to burn going down. She coughed but took another sip, then another. The warmth spread through her chest, chasing away some of the cold. She clutched the cup in both hands, staring into the amber liquid as if it held answers to questions she didn't know how to ask. "Thank you," she whispered, "for saving me." He didn't respond, just stood there looking at her with an expression she couldn't decipher. Outside, she could hear the crew moving about the deck, their voices low and rough. The ship creaked and groaned as it cut through the calming sea. Somewhere in the distance, a gull cried out, the first sign that land might not be so far away. "What's your name?" she asked. He was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. Then, "Thorn." "Elara," she offered, though he hadn't asked. He nodded once as if filing the information away, then moved toward the door. She watched him go, this man who'd pulled her from death's grip, this pirate captain with his scarred face and haunted eyes. As his hand touched the latch, she spoke again, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "Will you stay? Just for a while. I don't want to be alone." He turned back slowly. In the lamplight, she could see the exhaustion etched into his features, the weight of whatever burdens he carried. For a moment she thought he'd refuse, that he'd walk out and leave her to the silence and the dark. Instead, he pulled a chair from the desk and sat down, his back against the wall, his eyes never leaving her face. "Sleep," he said quietly. "You're safe now." And somehow, impossibly, she believed him. She woke to sunlight streaming through a porthole, warm and golden against her face. For a moment she didn't remember where she was. The gentle rocking of the ship felt like being cradled, and the blanket wrapped around her was heavy and comforting. Then memory crashed back. The storm, the drowning, the pirate captain with winter in his eyes. Elara sat up slowly, her body aching in places she didn't know could ache. Her muscles felt bruised, her throat raw from seawater and screaming. The cabin was empty. Thorne's chair sat vacant against the wall, and she wondered how long he'd stayed before slipping away. On the desk, someone had left a simple dress. Rough cotton, the kind a sailor's wife might wear, but clean and dry. Next to it, a basin of fresh water and a piece of soap that smelled faintly of lavender. She stood on shaky legs and made her way to the basin. The water was cool against her salt-sticky skin. She washed as best she could, scrubbing away the residue of the storm, then pulled on the dress. It was too large in the shoulders and short at the ankles, but it was warm and it was dry, and that was enough. When she emerged onto the deck, she stopped short at the sight before her. They were anchored in a hidden cove, sheltered by towering cliffs of dark rock that rose on three sides like the walls of a cathedral. The water here was impossibly clear, turquoise shading to deep blue where the depth increased. A narrow beach of white sand curved along the base of the cliffs, and behind it, thick vegetation climbed toward the sky. Palm trees swayed in the morning breeze. Birds she didn't recognize called to each other from the rocks. It was beautiful, achingly, impossibly beautiful. The crew was busy at work, some mending sails, others hauling cargo from the hold. They glanced at her as she passed but said nothing, returning to their tasks with the practiced efficiency of men who'd sailed together for years. She counted maybe 20 of them, ranging from boys barely old enough to shave to grizzled men with gray in their beards and scars mapping their arms. She found Thorne at the bow, staring out at the mouth of the cove where it opened to the open sea. He stood perfectly still, his hands braced against the railing, his profile sharp against the morning light. He'd changed clothes, worn leather breeches and a loose white shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows. His dark hair was pulled back with a strip of leather, revealing the full extent of the scar that cut through his eyebrow and disappeared into his hairline. "This is your sanctuary," she said, coming to stand beside him. He didn't startle at her voice, didn't turn to look at her. "One of them. How many do you have?" "Enough." His voice was rough, as if he hadn't spoken much that morning. "How do you feel?" "Like I drowned and came back." She touched her throat gingerly. "Thank you for the dress. It belonged to someone else." He said it flatly, without elaboration, and she knew better than to ask who. They stood in silence for a while. The sun climbed higher, warming her skin. She could smell salt and green things growing, could hear the lap of water against the hull. It felt surreal, standing here with a pirate captain in a hidden cove, alive when she should be dead, caught between one life that had ended and another that hadn't yet begun. "What happened to your ship?" she asked finally. "The one you saved me from?" "Gone. The storm took her down within the hour." He paused. "You were the only survivor I could reach." The weight of that settled over her like a shroud. All those men, the captain who'd promised safe passage, the young sailor who'd helped carry her trunk aboard, smiling shyly when she'd thanked him, all of them, swallowed by the sea. "I should feel something," she said quietly. "Shouldn't I? Grief or horror or something, but I just feel numb. You're in shock still. It'll come later." He finally turned to look at her, and his eyes were softer than they'd been the night before. "Or it won't. The sea takes what it wants and leaves the rest of us to make sense of it. Sometimes there is no sense to make. You sound like you've lost people before." His jaw tightened. "Everyone loses people. That's the price of being alive." She wanted to ask more. About the scar, about the woman whose dress she wore, about what had driven a man to a life of piracy and hidden coves. But something in his posture told her the door had closed, that whatever vulnerability she'd glimpsed was locked away again behind walls of salt and stone. "What happens now?" she asked instead. "Do you ransom me? Leave me at the nearest port? What would you go back to?" The question caught her off guard. She opened her mouth to answer, then realized she had nothing to say. No home, no family, no husband. The life she'd been fleeing was as dead as the one she'd left behind. She was untethered, adrift in more ways than one. "I don't know," she admitted. Thorne studied her face for a long moment, as if trying to read something written there. Then he pushed off from the railing. "You can stay, until you figure it out." "Stay? Here? With pirates? You have somewhere better to be?" She didn't. That was the terrible, liberating truth of it. She didn't have anywhere to be, anyone waiting for her, any reason to go back to the world she'd known. For the first time in her life she was truly free, and it terrified her more than the storm had. "Why would you let me stay?" she asked. I'm nothing to you. A burden. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and something flickered in those winter sea eyes, something that might have been recognition or loneliness or the ghost of a memory. Maybe, he said slowly, I'm tired of watching people drown. Before she could respond, one of the crew called out from across the deck, something about provisions and the tide. Thorne turned away, his moment of openness closing like a fist. He strode across the deck barking orders, and the crew jumped to obey, moving with the synchronized precision of a body responding to its mind. Ilara stayed at the bow, watching the mouth of the cove where the open sea beckoned. Behind her, the hidden sanctuary. Ahead, the endless blue that had almost claimed her. And somewhere between the two, a pirate captain who'd pulled her from death and asked nothing in return. She touched the silver locket at her throat. Her mother's, the only thing she'd managed to keep from the wreck. Inside was a tiny portrait of her late husband, painted during better days when his eyes had still held light. She opened it, looked at his face, and felt nothing. No grief, no longing, just the distant recognition of someone she'd once known in another life. She closed the locket with a soft click. The sea kept its silence. But here, in this hidden place between sky and stone, something was beginning. Something she didn't have words for yet. Something that felt like drowning and breathing all at once. Thorne glanced back at her once from across the deck. Their eyes met. Neither of them looked away. And in that moment, Ilara understood that she'd been saved for a reason. She just didn't know what it was yet. 3 days in the cove and Ilara had learned the rhythm of pirate life. They rose with the sun and worked until dusk, mending sails, checking rigging, inventorying the cargo stored in the caves that honeycombed the cliffs. The work was endless, purposeful, and strangely comforting. She'd expected chaos, violence, the lawlessness she'd heard whispered about in Philadelphia parlors. Instead, she found order, discipline, men who knew their place and their purpose, bound together by something stronger than law, survival. They'd given her a hammock in a small storage room below deck, away from the crew's quarters. Privacy was a luxury here, but Thorne had insisted. She'd protested at first, said she didn't need special treatment, but he'd simply looked at her with those unreadable eyes and said, You're not crew, not yet, not yet, as if staying was inevitable, as if she'd already made a choice she didn't remember making. She'd begun helping where she could, hauling water from the freshwater spring they'd found in the rocks, preparing meals with the ship's cook, a gap-toothed man named Briggs, who told stories that were probably lies but entertaining nonetheless. The crew had accepted her presence with surprising ease, though they kept their distance, watching her with curiosity tempered by caution. Thorne, on the other hand, kept his distance with intention. He was always working, inspecting the ship, navigating by stars she couldn't name, meeting with his quartermaster in hushed conversations that stopped when she drew near. At night, he disappeared into his cabin and didn't emerge until morning. She'd see lamplight glowing through the porthole until well past midnight, and she wondered what kept him awake. Charts? Memories? Demons he couldn't outrun even here in his sanctuary? On the third evening, she found him on the beach. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold. Most of the crew had returned to the ship for their evening meal, but Thorne stood at the water's edge, his boots in the surf, staring out at the horizon. He'd removed his shirt in the heat, and she could see the map of scars across his back, some thin and white with age, others darker, newer. A life written in violence. She approached slowly, her bare feet silent on the sand. He didn't turn, but she knew he'd heard her. Men like him were always listening. The sunset here is different, she said, stopping a few feet away. Bigger somehow, like the sky has more room to breathe. No buildings to block it out, he replied. No smoke from factories. Just the world as it was made. Do you prefer it? This life away from civilization? He was quiet for a long moment. A wave rolled in, foam swirling around his ankles. I prefer not being hung. It was meant as a joke, she thought, but there was no humor in his voice. She moved closer, until she stood beside him, the water cool against her feet. Up close, she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. Why did you become a pirate? She asked. If you don't mind me asking. I do mind. I'll ask anyway. That earned her a glance, quick, surprised, almost amused. You're stubborn. So I've been told. She tilted her head, studying his profile. You don't seem like the other pirates I've heard about. You don't drink yourself senseless. You don't mistreat your crew. You saved me when you could have left me to drown. Maybe I'm not like the others. Or maybe you're running from something. His jaw tightened. For a moment she thought he'd walk away, shut down the conversation like he'd done before. Instead he surprised her. I was in the Royal Navy, he said quietly. Served for 8 years. Rose to lieutenant. Believed in order, in duty, in the rightness of the crown. He paused, his eyes distant. Then I was ordered to fire on a merchant vessel. Unarmed. Carrying families. Men, women, children. They'd refused to pay an unjust tariff, and my captain wanted to make an example. Ilara's breath caught. What did you do? I refused. So did 3 others under my command. We were arrested, court-martialed. The others were hung as mutineers. His voice was flat, empty. I escaped the night before my execution, killed 2 guards in the process. The crown put a price on my head, dead or alive, though they'd prefer dead. So you became what they accused you of being. I became free. He finally turned to look at her fully, and I became a killer. Don't mistake what I am, Ilara. I've taken ships, stolen cargo, spilled blood when I had to. The men who sail with me, they're not innocent. Neither am I. She should have been afraid, should have recoiled, run back to the ship, demanded he take her to the nearest port. But standing there in the dying light, looking at this scarred, haunted man who'd saved her life, she felt no fear, only a strange, deep recognition, as if she were looking at a reflection of herself in darker glass. My husband was a good man, she said softly, kind, honest, everything society said I should want, and I did want it in the beginning. The house, the respectability, the promise of a quiet life. She wrapped her arms around herself, but it was like drowning in silk, slow, suffocating. And when he died, I felt relief. What kind of person does that make me? Human. I didn't love him, not the way I should have. And I can't even grieve him properly because I'm too busy grieving the life I never got to live. She laughed bitterly. So maybe we're both running. Maybe that's why the storm brought me here. Thorn reached out slowly, hesitantly, and touched her shoulder. His hand was warm despite the evening breeze, rough with calluses but surprisingly gentle. The storm didn't bring you anywhere. You survived it. That's different. Did I? Sometimes I wonder if I actually drowned that night. If this is all just something my mind invented in those final moments. You're alive. His grip tightened slightly, grounding. You're here. That's real. She covered his hand with hers, feeling the scars on his knuckles, the strength in his fingers. They stood like that as the sun sank below the horizon, painting the world in shades of purple and deep blue. The first stars began to appear, bright and sharp against the darkening sky. Will you teach me? She asked suddenly. Teach you what? To sail, to navigate, to survive out here. She turned to face him fully. I don't want to go back. To Philadelphia, to Savannah, to anywhere that feels like a cage. But I can't stay here as a passenger forever. If I'm going to be part of this world, I need to know how it works. He studied her face, searching for something. Doubt, perhaps. Fear. But she kept her gaze steady, letting him see the determination there. The hunger for something more than the half-life she'd been living. It's not easy, he warned. The sea is cruel. This life is dangerous. You could die a dozen different ways before the month is out. I could have died in that storm. I could have died in my sleep back in Philadelphia, suffocated by respectability. She squeezed his hand. At least here, I'd die on my own terms. Something shifted in his expression. A crack in the walls he kept so carefully maintained. He nodded slowly. Tomorrow, then. We start with knots, then the rigging, then navigation. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. You might end up hating me before this is done. She smiled. I doubt that. They walked back to the ship together as darkness fell completely, the stars multiplying overhead like diamonds scattered across black velvet. The crew had lit lanterns on deck, warm light spilling across the water. Someone was playing a fiddle below, a melancholy tune that spoke of distant homes and distant loves. At the gangplank, Thorn paused. Ilara? Yes? You were right. About me running. He looked away toward the mouth of the cove. But maybe I've been running long enough. Before she could respond, he was gone, climbing aboard and disappearing into his cabin. But for the first time since she'd been pulled from the sea, Alara felt something other than numbness, something warm and tentative and terrifying. Hope. The rope burned her palms as she hauled on the line, her muscles screaming in protest. Above her, the sail snapped taut in the wind, and she felt a surge of satisfaction so pure it almost made her laugh. 2 weeks ago, she couldn't tell a bowline from a clove hitch. Now her hands moved with purpose, tying knots without thinking, reading the wind like a language she'd always known but never spoken. Good, Thorne called from the helm. Now secure it and check the starboard rigging. She did as instructed, moving across the deck with growing confidence. The crew no longer watched her with curiosity. She'd earned something close to respect. Briggs had started saving her the best portions at meals. Young Tom, barely 16, asked her to teach him to read using the books from Thorne's cabin. Even the quartermaster, a scarred brute named Hawkins who rarely spoke, had nodded at her that morning in what might have been approval. But it was Thorne's attention that mattered most, though she tried not to examine why too closely. He'd kept his word about teaching her. Every morning they worked together. Navigation by stars, understanding currents, reading weather patterns in the color of the sky. He was patient in a way that surprised her, never mocking her mistakes, always explaining until she understood. In the afternoons, she practiced with the crew, learning the physical demands of shipboard life until her body adapted, grew stronger. And in the evenings, they talked. It had started accidentally. She'd found him on deck one night, unable to sleep, staring at charts by lantern light. She'd asked what he was planning, and instead of dismissing her, he'd explained. Trade routes, safe harbors, the movements of naval patrols. The conversation had stretched past midnight, and when she'd finally gone to her hammock, something had shifted between them. A wall had come down. Now it was routine. After the crew settled in for the night, she'd find him, sometimes on deck, sometimes in his cabin, and they'd talk about everything and nothing. He told her about growing up in Portsmouth, the son of a sailmaker who'd wanted better for his boy. She told him about Philadelphia winters, her mother's garden, the way her husband used to hum while he worked. They shared stories like currency, trading pieces of themselves in the lamplight. But there were things left unsaid, glances that lasted too long, moments when their hands would brush and neither would pull away, a tension building like a storm on the horizon, inevitable and electric. Tonight, she found him on the beach again. The moon was full, turning the sand silver and the water to liquid mercury. He stood with his back to her, shirtless in the warm night air, and she could see the tension in his shoulders. Something was wrong. Thorne? He turned, and even in the moonlight she could see the darkness in his expression. We're leaving tomorrow. The words hit her like a physical blow. What? Why? A merchant convoy passed near the mouth of the cove this morning. They didn't see us, but it's only a matter of time before someone does. This place isn't safe anymore. He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. We have another sanctuary 3 days south. We'll go there. Then we go. She tried to keep her voice steady. I can help. I know the ship now. I can. Not we, me and the crew. He looked at her, and there was something raw in his eyes. There's a settlement half a day's sail from here. Good people. They'll help you get passage to Charleston or Savannah. You can start over. Make a real life. I am making a real life. Here. With. She stopped, the words catching in her throat. With all of you. This isn't a life, Alara. It's survival. Today it's peaceful, but tomorrow we might be running from a naval frigate or fighting off another pirate crew. You could get hurt, killed, or worse if we're captured. His voice roughened. Do you know what they do to women on pirate ships when they're taken by the Navy? They assume complicity, collaboration. You'd hang alongside us. Then I hang. She stepped closer. Do you think I don't know the risks? I've chosen this, Thorne. I've chosen. Again she stopped, afraid to finish the sentence. You've chosen what? His voice was barely above a whisper. Adventure? Freedom? You can have those things without throwing your life away on a fugitive ship. I've chosen you. The words hung between them like a confession, impossible to take back. The waves rushed up the beach, retreated. A nightbird called from the cliffs. Thorne stared at her as if she'd struck him. You don't know what you're saying. I know exactly what I'm saying. She closed the distance between them, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his skin. I've spent my whole life being what other people expected. The dutiful daughter, the proper wife, the grieving widow. And I was drowning in it, Thorn. Drowning long before that storm. Her voice shook. Then you pulled me out, and for the first time I could breathe. Ilara, I'm not asking for promises. I'm not asking you to be anything other than what you are. She reached up, touched the scar that cut through his eyebrow. I'm just asking you not to send me away. Please let me stay. He caught her wrist, but he didn't push her hand away. His thumb traced circles on her pulse point, feeling her heartbeat racing beneath the skin. You deserve better than this, better than me. You don't get to decide what I deserve. She searched his face. That night on the ship, when I asked if you would stay, you did. You sat in that chair and kept me company when I was terrified and alone. You didn't have to do that. You needed, and you gave it. Just like you've given me purpose these last weeks. Direction. Something to fight for. She took a shaky breath. So I'm asking again, will you stay? Will you let me stay? Not because you have to, because you want to. For a long moment, he just looked at her. Then slowly, he brought her hand to his lips and kissed her palm. The tenderness of it nearly broke her. I'm a wanted man, he said against her skin. I have a price on my head. No future beyond the next horizon. Then we'll sail toward it together. You'll regret this. When the running gets hard, when the danger gets real. Maybe. She smiled. But I'd regret leaving more. Something in him finally surrendered. She saw it happen. The last wall crumbling, the defenses falling away. He pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her, and she pressed her face against his chest, feeling his heart thundering beneath her cheek. They stood like that for a long time, breathing in sync, the sea whispering around them. If you stay, he said into her hair, you follow my orders on the ship. No arguments. Your safety depends on it. Yes, Captain. And you learn to fight. Properly. Not just knots and sails. I can do that. And if the day comes when I tell you to run to save yourself, you do it. Without hesitation. She pulled back to look at him. That's one order I won't follow. Despite everything, he almost smiled. Stubborn. Determined. She touched his face, traced the line of his jaw. I've been dead for a long time, Thorn. That storm didn't kill me. It woke me up, and I'm not going back to sleep. He kissed her then. Soft at first, questioning, then deeper as she responded. It tasted like salt and possibility, like drowning and breathing all at once. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, the moon had climbed higher, painting them in silver light. Tomorrow we sail, he said. Tomorrow we sail, she agreed. They walked back to the ship hand in hand, feet leaving twin tracks in the sand that the tide would erase by morning. Above them, stars wheeled through the darkness, the same stars that guided sailors home and led pirates toward new horizons. The sea kept its ancient rhythm, patient and eternal, holding its secrets close. In his cabin that night, she helped him pack the charts while he told her about their next destination. They worked together in comfortable silence, two people learning a new language, the language of partnership, of trust, of something deeper than either dared name yet. When she finally returned to her hammock, she found a knife on her pillow. Simple, well-balanced, deadly. A gift. A promise. She tucked it into her belt and smiled in the darkness. The widow who'd almost drowned was gone. In her place stood someone new. Someone forged by storm and saved by a pirate with winter in his eyes and scars mapped across his heart. Tomorrow they would sail toward whatever came next. Together. And for the first time in her life, Ilara wasn't afraid.